My mother's 62nd birthday dinner was supposed to feel comforting. A real celebration. Family gathered together, candles glowing across the table, everyone smiling for once. There were 18 of us seated around a long table at her favorite Italian restaurant downtown. The place with crisp white tablecloths, soft violin music playing through hidden speakers, and tiny candles flickering inside red glass holders she always adored. My sister Vanessa had picked the restaurant weeks before. My brother Dylan personally drove Mom there like the perfect son in some emotional family movie. And me? I paid for the entire evening. Every single part of it. The $340 dinner bill. The custom birthday cake that cost another $60. The flowers arranged in the middle of the table that everyone kept complimenting throughout the night. 2 days earlier, I had quietly sent the payment to the restaurant and told them to place the entire tab under one card. Mine. Nobody sitting at that table knew that. And honestly, that was where the real issue began. I arrived a little after 6. Mom was already seated at the head of the table laughing loudly at something Vanessa had just said. The whole family was there. Cousins, aunts, Mom's closest friends from church. Everyone looked polished, comfortable, and happy. I slid into the empty chair near the end beside Dylan and smiled like everything was perfectly normal. For the first 40 minutes it actually was. People ordered wine. Garlic bread kept getting passed around the table. Mom talked over everyone the way she always did, retelling stories she'd already shared countless times before. I nodded when necessary, smiled when expected, played my part. Then halfway through dinner Mom stood up. She tapped her fork gently against her wine glass. Ting, ting, ting. The entire table immediately went quiet. That had always been her thing. Growing up, she loved giving speeches at birthdays, graduations, holidays, any event that gave her an audience. "I just want to say thank you," she announced, raising her glass dramatically, "to my beautiful children." People smiled around the table. "Vanessa's getting married next year," Mom said proudly while looking toward her. "And Dylan just received a promotion." Everyone clapped politely. Dylan grinned. Vanessa reached for her fiancé's hand. Then Mom turned toward me. She paused just long enough for me to notice it, and then she smiled. Except it wasn't really a smile. It was that sharp expression she always used right before delivering something hurtful disguised as a joke. "And then there's Elena," she said. "Our family ATM." The entire table burst into laughter. Not polite laughter. Real laughter. Loud laughter. Vanessa bent forward, covering her mouth while laughing uncontrollably. Dylan stared down into his drink, grinning. My Aunt Teresa slapped the table hard enough to shake the silverware. Mom's friend Joan laughed so hard she nearly spilled her wine. "Oh my God," Joan gasped. "That is so accurate." And everyone laughed even harder. I stayed completely still. Mom wasn't done yet. Still holding her glass, she looked around the table and added, "Seriously, if anyone needs something, they just call Elena. Need a new appliance? Elena pays. Car trouble? Elena takes care of it." Honestly, at this point it's practically her full-time career. More laughter followed. Mom shrugged afterward like she had just delivered the funniest line of the evening. Like she was being charming. Like this counted as affection. Like publicly embarrassing me somehow qualified as love. I smiled anyway. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue. I simply picked up my fork and continued eating my pasta while the noise around me blended together. But inside me something shifted. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. That decision had actually been forming quietly for months, maybe even years. But sitting there, listening to my mother mock me in front of 18 people while everyone laughed along. Watching nobody step in. Realizing the woman I had financially supported for 4 years thought it was entertaining. Something inside me just went quiet. Not angry. Not emotional. Just finished. Like a switch finally turning off. I finished dinner. Stayed for dessert. Sang happy birthday with everyone else. Hugged my mother before leaving. I even told her I hoped she enjoyed the evening. Then I walked out at exactly 8:15. I drove home in complete silence. No music. No phone calls. Nothing. At 9:47 that night, I opened my laptop at my tiny kitchen table, logged into every financial account connected to my mother, and started. But to explain why, I need to go back. Because this didn't happen overnight. This had been building for 4 years. My father died in February of 2020. Massive heart attack. He was only 63 years old. One morning he was drinking coffee and arguing with the television news like he always did. By that afternoon he was gone. Just gone. Mom called me from the hospital crying so hard I could barely understand her. I drove there immediately and found her sitting alone in one of those uncomfortable plastic waiting room chairs beneath fluorescent lights that made everyone look drained. We barely spoke. Sometimes grief isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's just silence sitting beside silence. Dad handled all the finances in our family. Not because Mom wasn't capable, she absolutely was, but because he had always been the organized one. He paid every bill, managed the mortgage, tracked expenses inside a little black notebook he kept in the kitchen drawer beside the takeout menus. When he died, that notebook was basically the only system anyone had. 2 weeks later, Mom called me in a panic. "Elena, I don't know what's due. I can't find passwords. I don't understand any of this." I was 29 years old at the time. I had just completed my master's degree in finance and started working as a junior analyst at a firm downtown earning around $72,000 a year. Not bad money, but nowhere near wealthy. Still, I understood numbers. I understood systems. And she was my mother. She had just lost her husband. So of course I said yes. Just temporarily, I told myself. Just until she gets stable again. That was 4 years ago. At first it made perfect sense. Mom was devastated after Dad died. Some days she couldn't even get out of bed. Someone needed to make sure the mortgage was paid. Someone needed to make sure the lights stayed on and groceries stayed stocked. So I stepped in. I set up automatic payments, linked her accounts to mine, created spreadsheets because that's what I do when life feels chaotic. I organize it. Every dollar leaving her house got tracked. Every payment documented. Every receipt saved. Back then the monthly numbers looked like this. Mortgage, $1,450. Utilities, around $520 combined. Groceries and household expenses, $480. Her car payment and insurance, $390. Internet and cable, $160. Credit card minimum payments, $750. Almost $3,800 every single month before emergencies even appeared. And there were always emergencies. The water heater broke that March. $1,200. The refrigerator stopped working in May. Another $900. Then Dylan's brakes failed that summer. And somehow that became my responsibility too because he lived with Mom and constantly borrowed her car. Another $340 gone. By the end of the first year, I had spent over $51,000 supporting my mother's household. $51,000. On a salary that had only recently increased to $78,000. Meanwhile, I lived in a tiny studio apartment near the highway with peeling paint on the walls. I ate instant noodles 3 nights a week because they were cheap. I stopped buying clothes unless absolutely necessary. I hadn't taken a vacation in over a year. Every payday followed the exact same routine. Open banking app. Do the math. Transfer the money. Repeat. And every time I told myself the same thing. It's temporary. Mom will eventually figure things out. This is what family does for each other. But Mom never figured it out. Because she never needed to. I handled everything for her. By year 2, the pattern had become permanent. Mom stopped asking how much things cost. She simply bought whatever she wanted. Groceries suddenly came from upscale organic markets where strawberries somehow cost $11. The heating bill increased because she kept the house tropical during winter and freezing during summer. Then Vanessa moved back home between apartments for 6 months, and suddenly her phone bill quietly appeared among the expenses too. $85 every month added without anyone even asking me first. And then came Vanessa's engagement. She got engaged during the spring of the 3rd year I had been paying everyone's bills. Her fiancé Jordan was honestly a decent guy, but the engagement party became this massive production entirely because of Mom. "We have to rent the Rosehill Garden venue," she told me excitedly one evening over the phone. "It's only $2,800. Only." I remember staring at the ceiling of my apartment after hearing that. Then I transferred the money anyway. Mom bought herself a dress for the party. $640. Flowers. $380. Elegant paper invitations with calligraphy. Another $220. Every single expense came from me. Vanessa had no idea. Dylan had no idea. Mom would simply call, tell me how much was needed, and I would pay it automatically every time. Dylan wasn't innocent either. He was just less expensive. He stayed at Mom's house, ate her groceries, used her gas money. Every few weeks Mom would call saying something like, Dylan's short on rent this month. Can you send him $200? And I always did, because what exactly was I supposed to say? No. Then sit there listening to my mother sigh heavily into the phone, while making me feel selfish for not rescuing everyone again? So I kept paying. And I kept updating the spreadsheet. Every transaction. Every dollar. Every receipt. By the end of year 2, I had spent nearly $119,000 total. By the end of year 3, that number had climbed beyond $163,000. And through all of it, not once did anyone ask how I was doing. Not once did Mom say, Elena, this is too much for you. Not once did Vanessa quietly ask if I was okay covering everything. Not once did Dylan sincerely thank me. The closest I ever came to mentioning it happened around 2 years in. Mom and I were talking on the phone when I carefully said, maybe you could start contributing a little more toward groceries or utilities? There was a long pause. Then Mom sighed dramatically. Elena, I'm a widow. I don't have income. You know that. Except she did have income. Dad's pension paid her around $2,400 a month. She also had over $40,000 sitting untouched in savings for more than a year. But I didn't argue. I dropped the conversation immediately. And here's the part nobody in my family knew. While all this was happening, my career was actually improving. I got promoted twice. The first promotion came near the end of year 1, right when I was drowning in everyone else's expenses. I became a senior analyst and my salary increased by $18,000. I never told my mother. I never told any of them. Not because I felt embarrassed about earning more money, but because I knew exactly what would happen the moment they found out. The requests would increase. The emergencies would suddenly grow. And somehow, every extra dollar I earned would immediately become shared family money. I had already seen proof of that. Early on, maybe 6 months after Dad passed away, I casually mentioned during a phone call that I had received a small performance bonus at work. Nothing major. Just an offhand comment. Less than a week later, Mom called sounding stressed. Elena, sweetheart, the kitchen floor needs repairs. It's urgent. They said it'll cost around $3,000. My bonus had been $2,400. She didn't know that. And honestly, it wouldn't have mattered. After that, I learned to stay quiet. Whenever Mom asked about work, I kept everything vague. I'm still working in finance, I'd say. She would nod distractedly and immediately move on to something else. Usually something she needed. She never once asked what my actual position involved. Never asked about my salary. Never asked whether I enjoyed the work I did. Vanessa didn't ask either. Dylan definitely didn't. At family dinners, conversations about my life usually lasted maybe 10 seconds before someone interrupted to talk about Vanessa's latest relationship problem, or Dylan's apartment search, or Mom's broken washing machine, or whatever new issue had appeared that week. Eventually I stopped trying. It became easier to disappear quietly than sit there feeling invisible in front of everyone. Then came my second promotion. 18 months after the first one, I became Director of Financial Analysis. My salary increased to $145,000 a year. And still my life barely changed. I stayed in the same modest one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood outside the city. The same apartment with thin walls and a heater that clicked loudly throughout winter. I drove my old 2019 Honda Civic with more than 67,000 miles on it. I wore the same office clothes I'd owned for years. Neutral sweaters. Black slacks. Comfortable shoes. To anyone looking at me, I probably appeared to be someone barely managing financially. The truth was, nobody was really paying attention to me at all. I had savings too. Not a fortune. Not after spending 4 years quietly funding my mother's household. But enough to know I could have built a very different life by then. I had a retirement account I'd contributed to since my mid-20s. A small investment portfolio that I continued adding to little by little, even during the hardest months. And an emergency fund I rebuilt 3 separate times because Mom's emergencies kept draining it empty. I wasn't financially drowning, but I also wasn't truly living. There's a difference between surviving and actually having a life. And I felt that difference every single day. So there I was at Mom's birthday dinner listening to her laugh and call me the family ATM in front of 18 people. And while sitting there with my hands folded in my lap, I had one very clear thought. She's right. I am the family ATM. But ATMs can shut down. I didn't create a scene. I didn't stand up and reveal everything. I didn't point out that the dinner everyone was enjoying had been fully paid for by me. I didn't mention the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, the credit cards, the thousands of dollars quietly leaving my account every month. I said nothing. After 4 years of silence, one more quiet evening wasn't going to break me. What changed wasn't loud. It was smaller than that, colder than that. It was the sound of everybody laughing together. Not just Mom, Vanessa, Dylan, Aunt Teresa, Joanne, all of them. And afterward, nobody even looked at me. Nobody noticed my expression. Nobody stopped to consider maybe the joke had gone too far. Mom simply moved on to the next toast like I was an object sitting at the table instead of a person. Like I existed only to provide something. Like my role in the family had become functional, useful, replaceable. I finished dinner, stayed through dessert, hugged my mother goodbye, told her happy birthday. Then I left at exactly 8:15. I drove home in complete silence. At 9:47 p.m., sitting alone at my kitchen table, I opened my laptop and started undoing 4 years of my life. First, I logged into Venmo and changed my password, then Zelle, then PayPal. After that, I opened my banking app and removed Mom's accounts from every link transfer setting I had created. One by one, I disconnected everything. I reset the shared grocery delivery account, canceled the automatic utility payments, turned off the mortgage autopay, insurance, credit cards, internet, gas bill, electric. Every recurring payment I had quietly managed for years. Click after click after click. Methodical. Calm. Like checking items off a list. 43 minutes. That's how long it took to completely remove myself from their financial survival. When I finished, I closed the laptop and sat alone in the dark living room. I expected to feel guilty, or angry, or maybe even powerful. Instead, I just felt tired. Deeply, painfully tired. Like I had been carrying something unbearably heavy for years without realizing how much it weighed. And I had finally put it down. Then I went to bed. And for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The next morning was Thursday. I woke up at 6:30, showered, got dressed for work, grabbed coffee on the way to the office, and followed my normal routine like nothing had changed. I didn't check my phone until around 9. There was one text from Mom sent at 7:14 a.m. Hey sweetheart. Did you pay the electric bill this month? Got a notice saying it's overdue. I read it. Then I placed my phone face down on my desk and returned to work. By lunchtime there were 4 more messages. Elena? The grocery app says the payment declined. What's happening? Call me please. I slowly read every message while eating a salad at my desk. And I didn't answer any of them. Not because I was trying to punish her, but because there was nothing left to explain. I had made my decision carefully, quietly, fully aware of what it meant. And explaining myself was no longer part of it. By 5 o'clock that evening, Mom had called me 7 times. I let every call go to voicemail. That night I made myself a simple dinner, pasta and vegetables, and watched television in my apartment like it was any normal Thursday evening. Around 8 I checked my phone again. 12 missed calls now. 3 voicemails. I listened to the first one. Mom sounded irritated, not scared yet. Elena, what is happening? The mortgage payment didn't go through. The bank sent a notification. Please call me back because this is becoming ridiculous. I deleted the message before listening to the others. Friday morning I arrived at work by 8. My phone buzzed constantly throughout the day. Mom, Vanessa, Dylan. Again and again. I glanced at the notifications sometimes but never opened them. What was happening on their side I later learned piece by piece. At 8:23 Friday morning, the mortgage payment bounced. The bank sent a notification to Mom's email. The same account I had created for her years earlier. Mortgage due, $1,450. Overdraft fee, $35. Total now owed, $1,485. At 10:15 a.m., Mom tried buying groceries at the small market near her house. Her card declined. She stood there in line with a full shopping cart while customers waited behind her. Eventually she had to apologize and put everything back herself. At 11:40 Dylan stopped for gas. Card declined again. By 1 in the afternoon, Vanessa was texting me in all caps. What is going on? Mom is panicking. I never replied. By Friday night, Mom had called me 31 times. 31. I counted later when I finally checked the call history. And the voicemails changed throughout the day. The early ones sounded annoyed. Elena, just fix this. The afternoon ones sounded confused. I don't understand what's happening. But the final voicemail, left at 9:58 p.m., was different. That was the first time Mom sounded uncertain. Elena, she whispered shakily. What did you do? Saturday morning I slept late. I made coffee, sat by the window with a book in my lap and enjoyed the silence in my apartment. Real silence. No emergency calls. No requests. No guilt. No one needing something from me every 20 minutes. Then at 6:47 that morning, the heat shut off in Mom's house. It was February. Outside temperature, 28 degrees. Inside the house, without the furnace running, the cold settled in quickly. By 10 in the morning, the living room temperature had dropped to 52 degrees. By noon it was 44. Mom called me at 7, then 7:15, then 7:30. Vanessa called at 8. Dylan called at 8:45, the first time he had contacted me in weeks. By 10 o'clock, the messages sounded completely different. Elena, the heat is off. Mom is crying. Please just fix this. It's freezing in here. Please. I read every single message while holding my coffee mug with both hands. And what I felt was complicated. There was still pain somewhere inside me. A sharp ache under my ribs. The part of me that still loved my mother. The part that remembered who she used to be before grief and dependence slowly changed her into someone who only knew how to take. But underneath that pain was something stronger. A quiet voice saying, "This is the reality you protected them from. This is what happens when you stop carrying everyone alone." So I didn't answer. By Saturday night, Mom had called me 80 times total since Thursday. 80. I know because Vanessa texted me at 11 p.m. saying, "Mom has called you 80 times. Please, Elena. Just talk to her." I turned my phone off completely and went to sleep. Sunday morning, I was making breakfast when someone knocked on my apartment door. It was Vanessa. She wore a thick coat wrapped tightly around herself, a scarf covering half her face, and her cheeks were red from the cold outside. She looked exhausted. When I opened the door, she stood there staring at me for a moment. Really staring, like she was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Then her eyes moved past me into my apartment. The place was small. 1 bedroom, tiny kitchen, a living room that also functioned as a dining room. Nothing expensive. No fancy furniture. No decorations. No oversized television. Just a worn couch, a second-hand bookshelf, a small coffee table, and a pair of neatly lined-up shoes near the door. That was it. Vanessa slowly stepped inside, quietly looking around. Her engagement ring, the one Mom had obsessed over for months, the one I had secretly helped Jordan afford without either of them knowing, caught the morning sunlight. "This is where you live?" she asked softly, like she truly had never imagined it before. "Yeah," I replied. "Do you want coffee?" She didn't answer immediately. She kept looking around the apartment, noticing the plain walls, the tiny kitchen counter, the simple clothes hanging inside the half-open closet. Finally she looked at me. Her eyes were already filling with tears. "Elena," she whispered, "how long have you been paying for Mom's house?" I poured coffee for both of us and handed her a mug. "Sit down," I said quietly, and then I told her. Not every detail, not every receipt, but enough. I told her about the spreadsheet, the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, the car payments, Dylan's breaks, Mom's credit cards, the engagement party flowers, the expensive invitations, everything. Then I told her the total. $187,000, I said. Over 4 years. Vanessa became completely still. She held the coffee cup tightly in both hands and stared down at the table while emotions crossed her face in waves. Shock, confusion, disbelief, and finally shame. She didn't know? Vanessa asked weakly. I gave a small shrug. She either didn't know or didn't want to know. And you never said anything? I looked at her carefully. When exactly would I have said something? I asked. Every time I tried, Mom made me feel guilty for even mentioning it. I repeated Mom's favorite line quietly. I'm a widow. I don't have income. Vanessa closed her eyes tightly. She has Dad's pension, I continued. She has savings. She just never needed to touch any of it because I was paying for everything. Vanessa pressed both hands against her face. Oh my God, she whispered. We sat there silently afterward while sunlight slowly moved across the kitchen floor. Somewhere in the hallway outside, a neighbor's dog barked. A car passed outside the building. Finally, Vanessa looked at me again. What do you want me to do? She asked. Nothing, I said immediately. I don't want you fixing this. I just need Mom to understand what's actually been happening. I paused. And I need her to figure it out herself. Vanessa nodded slowly. Then she looked at me again. Not with pity but with something heavier. Something more honest. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm really sorry, Elena. I had no idea. I know, I said softly. That's part of the problem. Monday morning, Mom finally called the bank herself. After 80 calls by Saturday night and dozens more on Sunday without any response from me, desperation finally pushed her to investigate on her own. She wanted to know why payments had stopped. Why everything was suddenly falling apart. The bank manager, a calm professional woman named Cynthia, pulled up the records and carefully reviewed the account history. Then she told Mom exactly what she found. Mom called Vanessa immediately afterward. Vanessa called me. The bank manager showed Mom everything, she said quietly. There was tension underneath her voice now. Anger too. Not just recent payments. Everything. Every transfer. Every autopay. Years of records. Mom is realizing none of the money ever came from her accounts. I know, I said. Vanessa exhaled shakily. She's not handling it well. I know that too. There was a long silence between us. Finally, Vanessa spoke again. She wants to talk to you. I stared out the office window for several seconds before answering. I'm not ready for that. And I meant it. Not because I hated my mother, but because I needed her to sit with the truth for once. Not just the money, the loneliness, the pressure, the exhaustion of being the person everyone depended on while nobody ever stopped to ask what it was costing me. Vanessa stayed quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, Okay, I understand. By the end of that first week, the situation had turned into something Mom could no longer dismiss or joke about. The mortgage had bounced twice. The bank mailed a formal warning notice. Not foreclosure yet, but dangerously close. The wording was polite and professional, but the meaning was clear. Continue missing payments and the next step would arrive quickly. The heat had now been off for 5 days. Mom tried calling a repair company Sunday afternoon, but when she gave them her card for the overdue balance and reconnection fee, it declined immediately. She didn't have the $847 needed to restore service. She called Vanessa. Vanessa didn't have that kind of money. She called Dylan. Dylan had $60 in his checking account. The electric bill was now $380 overdue. A shut-off notice arrived Tuesday morning. The car insurance payment bounced too. On Wednesday, Mom received another warning letter stating her policy would be canceled within 10 business days if payment wasn't received. Meanwhile, her credit cards, 2 cards whose minimum balances I had quietly paid for years, were now overdue for the first time in a long time. Late fees piled onto interest charges. Collection calls started coming in. And groceries became a serious issue. Without the cards working and nobody stepping in to rescue things anymore, the refrigerator started emptying quickly. Mom still had her $2,400 monthly pension payment deposited at the beginning of the month. But now that money had to cover everything. And $2,400 disappears very quickly when you're used to spending nearly double that amount every month without consequences. To his credit, Dylan actually started searching for part-time work. It was the first serious effort he had made in nearly 2 years. Vanessa quietly started buying groceries for Mom herself whenever she could. Not enough to solve everything, but enough to keep food in the kitchen. Mom continued calling me every day. 10 times. Sometimes 20. And the voicemails kept changing. By Wednesday they sounded like this. Elena, please. I know what I said at dinner was cruel. I'm sorry. Can we please just talk? By Friday. The heat is still off. It's freezing in this house. I don't know what to do anymore. Please, sweetheart. Please help us. Just this once. I swear we'll figure it out. Then the following Monday, day 8, her voice sounded completely broken. Elena. I talked to the bank. She was crying now. Real crying. I know how much you've been paying. I didn't realize it was that much. I swear to God I didn't realize. A shaky breath. Please call me back. I'll do anything, Mom said in the voicemail, her voice shaking more with every word. Just tell me what you want. Name your terms. Please just call me back. I listened to every voicemail. Every single one. And still, I never called. While my family was struggling financially, panicking over overdue bills, declined cards, and warning notices, I was doing something I hadn't truly done in 4 years. I was finally living my own life. That first week after I stopped supporting Mom's household financially, I looked at the extra $3,800 sitting untouched in my account, the money that normally disappeared into someone else's problems, and I decided to do something different with it. Something for myself. First, I paid down a large portion of my student loans, something I had postponed repeatedly because there was always another family emergency that seemed more important. Watching the balance decrease felt unreal, like finally breathing after holding my breath too long underwater. Then I increased the automatic transfers into my investment account. Not for anybody else. For my future. I went grocery shopping at the nicer market across town, the one I usually avoided because the prices always made me feel guilty. I bought fresh salmon, good bread that still felt warm inside the paper bag, real coffee instead of the cheap brand I had forced myself to drink for years. And then, on a random Tuesday night, I did something so simple it should have felt normal but didn't. I took myself out to dinner. There was a small Italian restaurant downtown I had walked past dozens of times after work. Warm lights glowing through the windows, candles on every table, soft music drifting through the open doorway. I had wanted to eat there for more than a year. But every time I considered spending money on myself, guilt stopped me. Mom might need something. Dylan could need help. Another bill might appear. So I never went. Until that Tuesday. I remember sitting alone at a small corner table while candlelight flickered softly against the window beside me. I ordered pasta and a glass of red wine and ate slowly, enjoying every bite like it was the first real meal I had experienced in years. At one point the waiter smiled politely and asked, "Are you waiting for someone?" And for a second the old instinct appeared. The urge to explain myself. To justify sitting there alone. But instead I simply smiled back and said, "No." He nodded, later brought me another glass of wine without making the situation uncomfortable, and quietly left me alone. I stayed there almost 2 hours. 2 full hours eating, thinking, breathing. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel guilty for spending money on myself. Because here's the truth nobody in my family understood. I hadn't only been paying for their lives financially. I had been sacrificing my own life emotionally too. The nonstop calls. The endless requests. The constant pressure quietly existing in the background every second of every day. That feeling that if I stopped paying attention for even one moment, something would fall apart. A bill would bounce. The lights would get shut off. Someone would need rescuing. It lived inside my chest like permanent weight. I carried it into work. Into grocery stores. Into bed every night. And suddenly it was gone. The silence in my apartment that week didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. Real peace. The kind I hadn't experienced since before Dad died. Vanessa started visiting me every Sunday after that. Then the Sunday after that too. Not to beg for money. Not to pressure me into fixing things. She came because she wanted to understand. I think in her own quiet way. She was trying to make up for years of not noticing what had been happening right in front of her. Not dramatically, just slowly, one conversation at a time. The second Sunday she came over, she brought a bottle of wine. We sat together on my old couch while rain tapped gently against the windows, and for the first time in years, someone in my family actually asked me real questions. Questions about me. What do you actually do at work? She asked. What do you even enjoy doing? Are you happy? Do you have friends outside the office? Then she asked quietly, when's the last time you did something only for yourself? And I couldn't answer immediately. I sat there holding my wine glass trying to think of one honest answer, and realizing I didn't really have one. So I told her everything. About the promotions. About my salary. About how I had stayed in that tiny apartment all these years, not because I couldn't afford something better, but because spending money on myself had started to feel selfish. Like every dollar used for my own happiness somehow meant taking something away from the family. I had internalized that mindset so deeply I stopped questioning it. Vanessa stared quietly into her wine. I thought this was just what people do for family, she admitted finally. It is, I said softly. But not like this. I leaned back against the couch and shook my head. Family isn't supposed to mean one person carries everyone while nobody even notices the weight. Vanessa stayed quiet for a long time after that. Finally she whispered, Mom doesn't understand. I know, I said. She really thinks money just appears. Dad handled everything before. Then you did. She never had to think about where any of it came from. Exactly, I replied. Vanessa looked at me carefully. So what happens now? I took a slow sip of wine before answering. Now, I said calmly, she learns. By the end of the second week, reality had forced changes inside Mom's house whether anyone liked it or not. For the first time in years, Mom started using Dad's pension money to actually pay bills instead of leaving it untouched in her account. The heat finally came back on. A partial mortgage payment was made, just enough to avoid another warning letter from the bank. But it was obvious now that the old system was gone permanently. The savings account Mom had protected for years, the $40,000 she never touched because she never needed to, had finally been opened. Reluctantly, carefully, Dylan got a part-time warehouse job. For the first time in years, he started paying for his own gas instead of quietly depending on other people to cover it. Mom and Vanessa sat down together one afternoon with actual paperwork spread across the kitchen table and built a real budget. Not imaginary numbers. Real numbers. What came in? What went out? What they could realistically afford. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest. One Thursday night during the second week, Mom called again. I almost ignored it completely, but when the voicemail came through, something in her voice made me stop and listen. Elena, she said softly. Her voice sounded smaller somehow, quieter than I had ever heard it in my life. I talked to Vanessa. I talked to the bank. And today I sat down and looked at everything. A shaky breath. Everything you've been paying for all these years. Long silence. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear to you I didn't understand how much it really was. Another pause. I think, maybe I never wanted to understand. Her voice cracked slightly. And honestly, I think that makes it worse. I sat completely still listening. I'm sorry, she continued. Not just for the money. For the joke at dinner. For making you feel invisible. For never asking if you were okay. For never thanking you. I closed my eyes at that part. You deserved better from us, she whispered. From me. Then, after another long silence, she said one final thing. I know you're not ready to talk yet. But whenever you are, I'll meet you there. On your terms this time. I listened to that voicemail 3 separate times that night. And for the first time since all of this began, I didn't delete it. Now, I'm not going to pretend everything healed overnight. That's not how real life works. Pain built over 4 years doesn't disappear after a single apology. But 3 weeks after Mom's birthday dinner, I finally agreed to meet her for coffee. Not at her house. Neutral ground. A small cafe near my office that she had never visited before. I arrived first. And when Mom walked in, she looked different. Smaller somehow. Older. Like the stress of the past few weeks had physically settled into her shoulders. She sat across from me quietly. No dramatic speech. No excuses. No guilt trips. She simply listened. And for the first time in years, I finally told her the truth about what those 4 years had actually felt like for me. The exhaustion. The loneliness. The constant anxiety. The strange feeling of being both invisible and essential at the exact same time. I told her how humiliating that birthday dinner had felt. How hearing everyone laugh made something inside me finally break. Mom cried quietly while I spoke. I didn't. I had already done my crying months earlier, alone in my apartment at night when the pressure became too heavy to carry anymore. When I finally finished talking, Mom wiped her eyes and looked at me carefully. "What do you need from me?" she asked. And for once, I already had an answer. "I need you to manage your own finances," I said calmly. "I need you to live within Dad's pension and your savings. I need Vanessa and Dylan to contribute. And I need you to stop treating money like it appears out of thin air, or out of me." Mom nodded immediately. Then I added one more thing. "And never call me the family ATM again." My voice remained steady, but I meant every word. Not as a joke. Not casually. Not ever again. I looked directly into her eyes. "I'm not a machine. I'm your daughter. And I deserve to be treated like one." Mom reached across the table and held my hand tightly. Her eyes were swollen and red from crying. "I know," she whispered. "I finally understand that now. It's been 2 months since that birthday dinner. Things look very different now. Mom pays her mortgage herself using her pension and savings. Vanessa contributes toward groceries and utilities. Dylan covers his own expenses now. The budget is tighter than before, and everyone feels it, but for the first time the household is functioning honestly. No pretending. No invisible safety net. No secret person carrying everyone behind the scenes. Mom calls me once every Sunday now. Not 80 times. Just once. We talk for 20 or 30 minutes, and now she actually asks how I'm doing. And listens to the answer instead of waiting to talk about herself. It's not perfect, but it's a beginning. Last month, I moved into a new apartment. Still a 1-bedroom, but brighter. Bigger windows. A kitchen I actually enjoy cooking in. I bought new furniture for the first time in years. And one afternoon I walked into an art store and bought a painting simply because it made me happy. Bright colors. Warm light. Something beautiful that belonged only to me. I still drive my old Honda Civic though. Some habits take time to change. But here's what I really want people to understand if they've listened this far. I didn't stop paying those bills to punish my mother. I didn't do it out of revenge or cruelty. I did it because somewhere along the way, I had made myself smaller and smaller so everyone else around me could remain comfortable. And sitting there at that birthday dinner, watching my mother laugh at me with a wine glass in her hand while the entire table joined in, she accidentally showed me exactly how invisible I had become. So I stopped shrinking myself. And for the first time in 4 years, I finally started taking care of the person who needed me most. Myself.